everybody, welcome back to another Perfectly Pieced Mystery Quilt and block tutorial video. Today we're going to be working on the Perfectly Pieced block for March 2026. It's the basket block. If you print out your digital files, they include a digital contents page. It shows you the block structure, what the custom quilting looks like, the all over quilting, and the border quilting that you get with this month's files. There's also instructions to make this 4-inch block featured project, and I'll be having another video probably next week making a featured project using the basket block, but we're going to make something a little bit different than this. After watching this video, you'll know how to stitch out this block, the quilting and the strawberry embroidery, and how to use the border files. So you can make this project just like that if you like, but we're going to make something a little bit different. On page 2 of this printout, they do give you some additional block project ideas for 4-inch, 6-inch, and 8-inch, different ways you can lay out the basket block and different coloring. Today what we're going to do is make one basket block with the quilting. I'm going to be making the 8-inch block size. If you're making a different block size, you just need to cut your fabric differently. If this is the first video you've seen mentioning the mystery quilt, I have a link below. I'm hosting a year-long project for the Perfectly Pieced Mystery Quilt. We're using one block and the borders each month. There's a free printout and it gives you layouts for both a lap quilt and a ladder quilt. In this printout, I do include some general guidelines, sizing, fabric requirements, borders, the optional borders. So all of that is linked below and that's free. I'm making my mystery quilt with Lori Holt fabrics. I have a fat quarter bundle of Gentler Times. That's where all of this comes from today. The solid I'm using for my borders is Kona Bone. I've got my single block with quilting instructions all printed out. I did not use any fusible. I did use heavy starch. It's called Faultless Heavy Finish Spray Starch. I've shown that before. I'm making 8-inch blocks. If you want to make a different block size, you just need to look at the block measurements. On page 5, you have all the block measurements. My sticky note is here to block out things that I don't want to accidentally cut, so I cut everything for the 8-inch block. You only need 2 colors of fabric for this, a color for your basket and a color for the background. There are some notes here about using the Kimberbell embroidery topping. I don't have this, so I will not be using this today. You'll get to see what it looks like when you don't use that. When you cut your fabric, pieces 2, 3, 4, and 5 are the basket, and the rest are background colors. When I cut the fabric, I noticed that a lot of these measurements were in quarters. I would round up to a half or to a full inch. It was just easier for me. We'll be using a light mesh cutaway stabilizer today, Kimberbell project batting if you have it, and I did not use any fusible backing or embroidery topping. For my stabilizer, I'm actually using this HBI no-show mesh stabilizer. I already pulled all of my threads. I'll show you my threads, and I pulled them a little bit differently this time. Normally I take my glide color card and I try to match all the threads, and I started doing that and I thought the thread colors were a bit soft for my taste, so I grabbed my phone, went on the internet, and pulled up a picture of a strawberry plant, and I picked more vibrant and bright colors. I did also change the strawberry seeds. I'm going to use a gold color instead of this purple rose color, and the color here that's called Calico, that's the basket quilting. I'm using the same color for both of these. Here's a list of my colors. I'll show them to you really quick, and then as we stitch through the project, I'll show you the colors as we move along. For the leaves, they called for light olive. I picked a more kind of intense bright green. This is a sim thread. Any thread that has that S in front is sim thread. For the outer and inner berries, I picked 2 colors of Floriani threads. I picked a bright red thread for the outer berry and a darker thread for the inner berry. I mentioned I changed the color for the seeds. Instead of purple rose, I'm using this Floriani gold color, and I'm also using this when they call for calico. This goes really well with the fabric that I picked out for my basket. White is white. I got some glide white thread here. Got that. For the flower center, I picked this bright yellow color, and for the strawberry tops, I picked this dark green. I haven't decided which color I want to use to stitch the border yet. I went ahead and pulled up all the border files like I do. We've talked about borders before and how sometimes the measurements that it gives you aren't quite the measurements of the file, and that has to do with how the files are designed. This month, if you pull up the 2 by 10 border, it's only 7 inches long. The 2 by 12 border is 10.5 inches long. The 2x14 border is 14 inches long. The reason those numbers don't always match has to do with the repeat of the pattern. So whatever design it is, sometimes those numbers just can't match because the borders are designed to go end to end to end and look continuous. We'll be bordering our block like we've done in the previous mystery quilt videos. I'll be using the 12-inch file and the 14-inch file. I have my batting pre-cut for my border strips and my block. I'm using Missouri Star Best Blend 80/20 batting. I buy these when they go on sale. I'll buy a twin or a full size and I cut it up and use it for Kimberbell projects. I do have some Kimberbell project batting, but I have that set aside for the home sewn project, which I'm filming after I film this video today. This is the Missouri Star 80/20 Best Blend. Nice and flat. I have used Hobbs 80/20 before. It's too poofy. The embroidery machine doesn't really like it. You're also going to want some scissors. I have my double curved applique scissors, my snips, and then of course you're going to need your Kimberbell paper tape. I have my light mesh cutaway loaded into my 9.5 by 14 inch hoop. Hand tighten, screwdriver tighten. Let's head over to the machine. I'm on a baby lock meridian. My files are on USB. I always have my instructions right next to me. You really want to have this nearby. It'll make it easier to keep track of your pieces. I use a folding metal book stand. I'll link information about that below. And I have the new home sewn needle minder here. This is great with a metal book stand. Not only does it help hold your instructions a little more securely, but as you're working through something, you can move it and keep track of where you are. It's almost like a line keeper for cross stitch. Really nice. I'm working with a regular 7511 embroidery needle and I have the white thread on my machine. Let's go ahead and load our file. I'm going to be working with the 8-inch block with quilting today. So if you're using a different size, just bring up the appropriate size that you want to work with. You'll see you've got 2 blocks for each size because you have without quilting and with quilting. I'm going to use 8-inch with quilting today, and we're going to stitch out all those fun strawberries. I'm going to hit set and embroidery, and we're ready to get started. The first few steps we've done several times before in other projects. I'll go ahead and run them together. They're really simple. We're going to stitch the batting placement line. Place your project batting to cover that line. I usually add a piece of tape, stitch the tack down, and then trim. I'll run all of that together with music. Once your batting is tacked down and trimmed, you can stitch out the piecing template. Again, I have the white thread on my machine. Our piecing template is all stitched out. We're going to start with our piece 1 fabric. Piece 1 is right here. It's the opening between the basket and the basket handle. You want to grab your piece 1 fabric, place this one right side up. Make sure you completely cover this space, the piece 1 space, and then we're going to stitch the trimming and placement line. It's going to go across the top. I'll add a little piece of tape down here at the bottom just in case. Here we go. Once that's stitched out, we want to go ahead and trim this part right here, the part that's on top of the trimming and placement line. I've got that little bit trimmed off. You want to grab your piece 2 fabric. We're going to center it along that line and place it right sides together. So right side down, and then we're going to stitch the seam. I'm going to add a piece of tape to that. The seam is stitched. I'm going to use my clover seam roller today versus getting up to the iron and pressing at each individual step. If I was making the 4-inch block, I would probably get up and go ahead and press this. But this will be fine. I'm making the larger block size. Let's just roll this out. You can also finger press it. That keeps that nice and flat. The next thing we're going to stitch out is our next trimming and placement line, and that's going to go this direction. That's all stitched out. We want to trim away these 2 pieces of fabric right here. Next, you're going to grab your piece 3 fabric, center it along that line, right side down, and we'll stitch the seam. One thing about this fabric, and I did think about it when I cut this fabric, you can see it's very linear. We've got the up and down and across, and I knew this part of the basket was going to be angled. So this won't line up perfectly with this as far as the way the print looks, but that doesn't bother me. However, if you're working with something similar or something directional, you might want to stitch out the piecing template first, and then you can cut these angled pieces accordingly. We're going to center this, tape it, and stitch the seam right side down and tape. Going to remove the tape, flip it, press it, and then we're going to stitch our next trimming and placement line, which is going to go over here. Same thing we just did. We're going to trim this away, and then we're going to get our piece 4 fabric, place it right side down, tape it, and stitch the seam. I want to pull that toward me, flip it and press it, and then we're going to stitch our next trimming and placement line. It's the same steps throughout the block for this. Our next trimming and placement line is going to go down here. There's not a lot to trim for this one, but we do want to go ahead and trim this little bit extra off. I've got that trimmed. We're going to place piece 5. Make sure you don't place it like this. You want to place it like this because we're going to stitch the seam and then it's going to flip this way. This is the bottom of our basket. So make sure you've got it right side down, covering the top part of your block. I'm going to center it along that trimming and placement line. I probably don't need tape because it's such a big piece, but I'm going to add a piece anyway. Let's stitch the seam. I've got to bring this toward me. Same thing. Take your tape off, flip it, press it, and stitch out the next trimming and placement line. You want to trim off the extra here and this little bit right here. Grab your piece 6. Right side down, center along the trimming placement line, add a piece of tape to hold it in place, and then stitch the seam. We want to go ahead and flip and press that, and then we're going to follow the same steps for piece number 7 on the other side. Same thing on this side. Go ahead and trim this, then grab your piece 7, place it, tape it, and stitch the seam. Going to pull that toward me. We want to flip and press, and I'm looking at the next trimming and placement line. It's going to be for piece 8. It's going to go up this way, so you definitely want to make sure that this piece is nice and pressed and out of the way before you stitch the next line. Let's stitch our next trimming and placement line. Now I can trim off that extra. We want to get rid of this here and this here. After I trim this piece here, I know I need to trim this. And this section is going to be piece 8, which is my background. You might notice you've got a couple of stitches right here. You may have to get in there and cut those so that you can get this lifted like that and get it all trimmed out of the way. That way it doesn't show through your background fabric. I'm going to grab my piece 8, which has some of the selvage. I do want to try and center it along the trimming and placement line, but I don't want to actually include the selvage in my project. That should be fine. I've got plenty of space. I'm going to tape that and then stitch the seam. I want to go ahead and remove the tape, flip this and press it, and then we'll stitch our next trimming and placement line. Trim the fabric, place piece number 9, stitch the seam, flip and press. We're ready to stitch out our next trimming and placement line. It's going to go across the top. Do you see how my fabric got caught here? Make sure you're paying attention. I'm going to go ahead and stop it and pick this up and then back up my machine and restitch this bit so I don't have this weird fold in my project. In case you're new to embroidery, here's how you can back up your machine. If you have a brother or a baby lock, I have a baby lock, you're probably going to have the exact same button and your layout will be similar. Needle minus plus. I'm going to go back about 10 stitches and my machine will move. I need to go back about 10 more. Perfect. I'm going to hit OK. And now I'm ready to put my pressure foot down and keep going. We want to trim everything on top of our trimming and placement lines. So this piece, this piece, this piece, this piece, and that piece. That's all trimmed, and I took all the lint off the top. I just grabbed a piece of paper tape and kind of went like that. Removed any of the dark colored lint. I don't want it showing through my background fabric. We're on piece number 10. Center it along that trimming and placement line. Right side down. I'm going to add tape and then stitch the seam. That's all stitched. I'm going to pull the tape off. I'm not worried about flipping and pressing because we're going to stitch trimming and placement, and then trim and place piece 11. And after piece 11 is done, I'm going to take this over to the ironing board and press it. Now I'm going to watch this as it comes up to the seam here, probably hit my start and stop just to make sure it doesn't catch. That'll slow down the machine. I don't want to have to unpick any more stitches. Let's stitch our next trimming and placement line. That worked out really well with the start stop button. I need to trim all the little pieces here, 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 and here. Everything is trimmed. We're on piece 11, right side down, center along the trimming and placement line. We'll add a piece of tape, stitch the seam, and go throw some stuff in the dryer because the laundry just beeped. My seam has stitched. What I want to do now is take off any remaining tape on my block. I want to take this to the ironing board and give it a really good press. The next thing we're going to stitch out is called the trimming line. It's going to go all the way around the block, so you want to make sure this has got a good press. I gave that a good press. We're going to stitch the trimming line that goes all the way around the block. I'm going to keep my finger on that start stop button. My trimming line is stitched out. Once again, I had another close call over here. I could have done better centering this piece. You can see I've got plenty of fabric here and just barely caught it over here, but it'll be fine. Don't forget you've got a 1/4 inch seam allowance, so for some reason you didn't catch anything in your trimming line, as long as it's within a 1/4 inch, you're good. The next step is the background quilting. It's going to go in here and then all the way around. It's the strawberries and the leaves. There's some flowers and loops, and has that in white. I don't think I want to do that in white. I can see the trimming line here in white. I don't like the way that looks. I'm actually going to stitch it out in the gold color. My background fabric has these little gold dots. This is the nice golden brown color. So I'm going to put this color on my machine, and I'm going to use it for this background quilting and for the basket quilting. Let's stitch out the background quilting. The background quilting is done. I'm so glad I did that in gold instead of white. It really ties everything together. That came out beautifully. The next step is to stitch out the custom basket quilting. They're using the color calico. I'm going to leave this gold on my machine and stitch out the basket quilting. That came out really cute. I'm glad I picked the color that I did. It blends in with my fabric, which already kind of looked like basket weave. This does add to it. It gives it a little texture. If you want to use a solid color for your basket, you can, and it'll end up looking like a woven basket once you stitch out that quilting. We're going to start working on the strawberries. The instructions have 2 layers of embroidery topping. They place that at this point before doing the strawberry embroidery. It says that it helps prevent shadowing under the stitched berries. I don't have any, and I didn't really have time to order it, so I'm going to stitch it out and you'll get to see what it looks like and decide if you want to use the embroidery topping or not. We're going to switch to the color. They're using light olive, and we're going to stitch out the strawberry leaves. I picked this brighter green color. I'm going to put that on my machine and stitch out the leaves. The leaves are stitched out. I can see my fabric underneath, but honestly it just doesn't bother me. I picked out this bright red for the outer strawberries. I'm wondering if it's going to look Christmassy. Let me pull the other red. This was the dark red that I picked for the inner strawberry. That red looks better. I'm going to go to my thread wall and see if I can find maybe a darker red than this and use this for the outers and then a darker red for the inner. I did find one. Never be afraid to change your threads even if you're halfway through a project. If you're stitching something out and you don't like the way that it's looking or you think it's going to look, just switch it. So I'm going to use this darker red that I originally picked for the inner berry for the outer 2 berries, and you can see that this red is just about 1 shade darker. I'll use that for the inner strawberry. I'll go ahead and do the outer berries and then switch my thread and stitch the inner berry. I'll run all that together. Those two reds look great. It was a really good move to change this outside strawberry. That other red that was a little bit brighter really would have looked Christmassy. Our next step is to stitch out the strawberry seeds. They're using purple rose. I'm using gold. I looked up what strawberries look like and the strawberry seeds were brown. I'm going to put this on my machine and stitch out the strawberry seeds. The seeds are all stitched. I do have a couple of jump threads. I'll have to cut those out. The next thing we're going to stitch are the strawberry top fills. I picked this color green for the strawberry tops. If you're following the coloring in the instructions, it's the color called Aloe. That is looking good. We're going to switch to white for the flower petal fills. And then if you're following the colors that are in the instructions, they're using a color called Jubilee for the flower centers. I picked a yellow. I looked up strawberry flowers online and I held my phone up to my thread wall and I came up with this yellow. Probably a little brighter, but that's okay. Let's go ahead and stitch out these two steps. We're all done. Let's have a look at it. I still need to cut the jump threads. I feel like if I would have put the embroidery topping underneath, I would have trouble with white showing through. Like you can kind of see some of the fabric coming through underneath the leaves, but because the fabric is brown and off-white, it just looks like veins in the leaves. I don't see anything really coming through on the strawberries. It looks really good. And after stitching out these flowers in white, I'm really glad I didn't stitch this quilting in white. It looks good with the flowers, but I don't think the white would have looked good for background quilting. For me, for my block, I'm going to set this aside. We'll trim everything together at the end. We're going to stitch out our borders. We're going to stitch out our borders. I'm going to show you the border files even though I mentioned it at the beginning in case this is the first time you're watching one of these videos. I'm bordering my 8-inch block on the sides first and then on the top and the bottom. So for the sides I need at least 8 inches and then the top and the bottom I need 12 because you'll have 2, 8, and 2, so that's 12. To border the 8-inch block you would think the 2x10 would work. When you bring this up, it's only 7 inches long. Why is it only 7 inches long? If you look at the design, you can see why it's only 7 inches long. This is one part of the design. So we have strawberry, flower, strawberry, leaf. If you put these end to end, the next one down will start with the strawberry. So you can't add a couple of inches because you won't get the full repeat. That's why you always need to check the border length on these designs. So let's bring up the 12-inch. The 12 inch is 10.5 inches long. That's perfect for my 8-inch sides. You can see strawberry, flower, strawberry, leaf, flower, strawberry, and then when you connect this down, it'll start here again. So you'll get a proper full repeat on your border. I've got my big hoop on the machine. We're going to stitch out the 14-inch today on camera, and then I'll stitch out the other ones off camera. We've got a strawberry, flower, strawberry, leaf, flower, strawberry, leaf, flower. So they're all kind of a little bit different, but they're designed to go end to end and to look continuous, not accidentally have like flower, half a leaf. That's why you want to make sure that you pull up all the borders, check the length, pick the one that's appropriate for your project. I'm going to go ahead and hit set. I need 2 of these for the top and bottom of my project. Edit. This button is the border duplicate key. I like to use that instead of the regular duplicate key because it'll work on both at the same time. I've talked about that several times. I'm going to add that one to the side. Let's space them out a little bit. Since we're going to be trimming batting and placing fabric and trimming, I'm going to go ahead and make sure that I'm using up space in my hoop. That looks good. And even though I'm only doing this once, I'm going to save it to my machine in case something happens during the stitch out. I don't want to have to try and figure out how to line it up again. We're ready to go. I can hit embroidery. And for the color, I decided to go with the dark red color that I used for my center strawberry. I'm going to use it throughout the stitch out. Then you'll be able to see all the steps really easily on camera. Stitch out our batting placement lines. These placement lines are 2 inches apart. I've got one really long batting strip because I cut it off a big piece of batting, and that's fine. Your batting strip for your borders can be longer than the placement area. What you want to do is cover the placement line just like we do with all of our other stuff where we do batting placement, batting tack down, and trim. That's exactly what we're going to do. I'm going to add a piece of tape here at the top and then I'm going to see about where this ends. I can go ahead and cut the extra off here at the bottom. I just want to make sure it extends past that batting placement line. I'm going to tape that at the bottom. Hold your hand underneath your hoop to support it. And then we're going to do the same thing on this side. Place our batting, grab some tape, make sure it's long enough, extend past that placement line. I'm going to trim this, and then I'll tape it, and then I'm going to stitch the batting tack down lines. Next, I'm going to want to remove the tape and trim everything that's outside of my batting tack down lines. Next, we're going to stitch out our fabric placement line. Next, we're going to place our fabric strips. We want to cover the placement lines. I've cut mine at 16 inches. You can see I've got about an inch above and below. Plenty of space. Make sure those lines are covered. You can also check for any dark threads or, dog hair, cat hair, lint, especially if you're using a lighter color, to make sure nothing is going to show through. I'm going to add some tape, and then I'm going to stitch the tack down. Once the tack down has stitched, you stitch out your quilting. I'll go ahead and quilt these, and then I'll stitch the shorter set of borders off camera. We'll trim everything together and put our block together. Let's stitch out our quilting. These are stitched out. I had a thread break down here on the loop, and then on the second one up on one of the flower petal curves. Not sure why, other than that, stitched out with no problems. I'm going to stitch out the shorter borders, and then we'll do all of our trimming and put our block together. We need to trim our blocks. I've got my rotating cutting mat, 8.5 inch square orange pop ruler. I do think this came out great. Let's do a quick close-up so you can see the embroidery. I did not use the topping. I don't really see any shadowing on this. It's the same over here under more regular light versus the light of the machine. I can see some of the fabric through the leaves, but I really do think that actually it looks like it's part of the leaf, part of the veining in the leaf, because it's a tan brown color. I like the colors I picked out for my berries. I went with darker reds instead of peaches. It goes really well with my background fabric that has the little red flowers. You can see the quilting on the basket. One thing that I have noticed kind of runs off right here, across the top, over to the side. It's really right on that edge, and in a couple places it's not hitting the basket, it hit the background fabric. You're never going to see it when it's in the quilt. Everything came out great. We'll go ahead and use this to trim our block to 8.5 inches square. That's if you're making the 8-inch block size. Any other size, use those trimming lines as a guide and go ahead and trim your block. Then we'll trim our borders and get everything together. We're going to trim our borders next. If you've never used the orange pop ruler, I explain it in previous videos. You can go back and see a more detailed explanation of how to set that up, where to put your rotary cutter, and some tips for using the orange pop rulers. I went ahead and separated all the border strips, cut off the excess stabilizer. Let's trim this short one together. We've talked about this before too. Don't trim on these. These are not the correct width apart. If you measure these, this is going to be 2 1/4. Let me show it with a different ruler. It'll be easier to see. 2, 2 1/4. Here's 2 1/2. When you flip it to the back, you can see the fabric placement line that you can no longer see on the front. And if you measure that, that's the outside line of stitching and the outside line of stitching, 2 1/2. I have a 2-inch strip. I want to cut it 2 1/2 inches wide. If you're doing the 1-inch strips, it would be 1 1/2. So look for that line on the back. Or if you really want to use these front ones, measure 1/8 of an inch out on either side. I have a 2 1/2 inch wide ruler. I'm going to use that to trim my strip, and even though I have a 2 1/2 inch wide ruler, I still sometimes slip with the ruler. I don't get it exactly right. Just do your best. It's really going to look good in the end. Don't sweat it. It's a quilt. It's going to be really unique. Nobody will have one that looks just like yours. No reason to get stressed over it. You can see I didn't trim the ends of the strip. That's because we're going to line it up and sew it onto our block. So just get the sides trimmed. I'm going to trim the rest of these off camera, and then we'll talk about getting our block together. Got all the strips trimmed. These are the two shorter strips. You can see how two berries are pointing down and the leaf and this berry are pointing up. So when I attach these, I want to make sure I attach them the same way. This strip is plenty long enough, and what's interesting about this is because it's longer than my block, I can decide which part of this design I want to see. I can choose to stitch it on right there, and then I have strawberry, strawberry, flower, and the little strawberry who's kind of pointing up runs off the end. Strawberry, strawberry, flower, there's that strawberry. Or if you want to make sure you get both of those flowers, you can center the flowers, then you'll lose most of that strawberry and half of that one. You could also line it up like this, and then you'll get one strawberry in each direction. When you do that, keep in mind you can see this lines up right here with the top. Let's measure and see where our 1/4 inch is, because we're going to sew a top border. I'm cutting into that strawberry. So if I wanted to make sure I got one pointing down and one pointing up, it's going to need to go right about there, and then you'll lose some of your flower. You can do the same thing and line up your ruler. This has a nice 1/4 inch line, and see what's going to get cut off. So it's just a matter of personal preference how you want to line up your border. I like it so I get one strawberry pointing up and one pointing down. I know I'll lose some of that flower, and clip it and sew them with a 1/4 inch seam, and then I'll bring that back and show you. Got these sewn on. I pressed out away from the block. It looks good. I've got my 1/4 inch here and my 1/4 inch here. Before I sew on the top and the bottom, I want to level these off. Then I want to show you all 3 of the blocks that I've done so far, because I've noticed something kind of interesting when I look at all of them together. It's something that you might be doing as well without even realizing it. It's nothing bad, but you want to stay tuned to see what I'm talking about. Major cliffhanger. Those are trimmed off, and now I can line up my top and my bottom, and I can do the same thing and think about how I want this to look, where I want this to land, then clip it and sew it on. I'm going to line up this leaf, the vein on this leaf, with that seam right there, and then when I go do the other side, I can line it up the same way, and then they're going to match. Here's the leaf. I want to line up the vein of the leaf with that seam, and then clip it, and I'll sew both of these on, press, trim, and we'll come back and look at our finished block. Here's my finished block. It turned out great. This one got sewed on a little bit crooked. You can see I've got a little bit more bottom border, so when I go to put this in, this is the straight line. Here, 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 here. This is a little bit short, but it'll get caught in the seam allowance, and then straight again. Let me show you what I found out between my blocks. Here's my first block, teacup block. Then we have the orange peel block, aka sweet potato block, from the feedback I've been getting. And now we have the basket block. Do you see what I'm looking at? Pink, red, red. So far, for the first 3 blocks, I've had pink or red in my borders. That's purely coincidental because I'm picking each one as we go. I have no advanced knowledge of any of the blocks, but as we progress throughout the year, I'm going to be keeping an eye on the colors I'm picking for my borders. And if I'm consistently picking a pink or a red because that looks good with the block, and I'm doing that for the next few months, I'll either try to keep that uniform throughout the year, or I'll try to make a conscious decision to not pick pink or red. So when we put it all together, I've got some other colors mixed in. So have a look at your first 3 blocks, see if you're doing anything like that. Kind of keep it in the back of your mind. I hope you've enjoyed stitching your perfectly pieced basket block with me. Again, I did the 8-inch block, 2-inch borders for the Perfectly Pieced Mystery Quilt. This is linked below, free downloadable packet of information. If you're new to Perfectly Pieced or thinking of signing up, please consider using my links below. I get a small commission from Kimberbell, but more importantly, it lets them know that people are watching my videos and like my content. Please be sure to like, subscribe, and share. Next, I'm going to be working on the home sewn tiling scene for April, and then I'm working on the quilted farm girl March blocks, and then I'm going to be coming back for the basket project. By watching this tutorial, you have everything you need to make your basket block. I also have videos where I show how to do a continuous border. You would do that if you're making this project as shown. I'll make sure they're linked below. But I'll be back in a few weeks with a really unique project for this block. I've got it worked out in my head. I just need to sketch it out and get all the materials. I think you're really going to like it. Thank you so much for making your perfectly pieced basket block with me. I would love to see how your mystery quilt blocks are coming along. There's a link below to my Facebook group. It's a small group, but we get a few more every day, so pop on in and share your mystery quilt blocks. I'll see you next time.